Belinda, we're live.
We
We're
are
live.
live.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to finally season 2 of Unspoken Matters. For those of you, yeah. Finally, I finally came back. I'm sure you guys thought I was not coming back. Well, for those of you, this is the first time you're tuning to Unspoken Matter. A little background. Right at the beginning of the pandemic, I, like everybody else, was going stir crazy. So I thought to myself, how could I use my time after work? Belinda, notice I said after work. How can I use my time after work to keep myself from going stir crazy? And so I started this podcast called Unspoken Matters. We had about 10 seasons, and you can find it now on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iTunes. It's still out there, so take time to go check it out. But we did about 10 episodes, which I call season 1, with the intention of coming back for a season 2, which I never made it back for season 2. I expected, number one, when the podcast started, to only get about maybe 5 or 10 listeners, because I thought no one wanted to listen to me. But in essence, I got thousands of listeners. And everybody was asking me, when are you going to do season 2 of your podcast? So I've been delayed because I wanted to come back and really bring you something, number one, that I could be proud of, that I thought stayed in line with what my original intention was to create a space so that we could have productive conversations. And the one thing that I always felt that I was missing when we did the first season of the podcast, I thought to myself, I would love to see the faces, or love everyone who's listening to see the faces of the individuals that I'm talking to look at our expressions, because for me, I'm very visual. And I think it gives a whole new different perspective when you can look at the individuals that's speaking or that's communicating. So that's what I wanted to do. And YouTube and the platform that we're on now lended itself to making that possible. So with that said, here we are, season 2 of Unspoken Matters. Now clap, Belinda. Hey! Well, today my guest is Belinda Pridgeon. That's right, long time. Hey, Belinda, if you look in the corner, you see something I did to celebrate you. And Belinda is in a sorority.
Yes.
And I have some little, let me see, point to right, some little green lines there to say thank you for agreeing to come on the podcast with me. But I have Belinda. I've known Belinda probably about 100 years. No, I've known her probably about 20 years. I've known her. She's my colleague. We worked together. Worked in the same city together. Now we're in different cities, but we've remained really, really good friends. And I thought that who would better kick off season 2 of my podcast, of my YouTube channel. The podcast is sitting in a YouTube channel other than Belinda. And also, who would be better to kick off? So we're starting this off, as you know, at the beginning of Black History Month. So who would be better to have this conversation and to say, hey, happy Black History Month to everyone, than my dear friend Belinda. And Belinda, as I was asking you, and I was thinking about kind of getting ourselves together, I was thinking, like, what am I thinking about? Belinda and I love her to death, as I said many times, like 98% of the time, and like 2% of the times, I want to fly to Houston and choke her, because a little history about us. We probably, what are we born 3 days apart? Belinda's birthday is the 14th, one day, and I'm on the 15th of September. We're Virgos. You would think that we would be aligned and get along. We probably agree about 60% of the time, but we passionately disagree about 40% of the time. And there are times that we disagree so hard, it's a friendly disagreement, that we usually have to take like a 2-day break from each other to regroup. So I thought to myself, who could I better get on a podcast or on a YouTube channel, have a conversation with, to open this new chapter of my podcast, other than Belinda. And also I wanted to bring up some conversation we've been having, because the beauty of this, I always think to myself when I'm talking with my friends, they're so diverse. Man, if I could get this on a record, if this could be recorded or video recorded, man, this is some good conversation. So Belinda, thanks for agreeing to come on and talk with me today.
No, no problem at all, Craig. And you're right. We do fight like brothers and sisters most of the time. But we do have good conversations and some really open and honest conversations. And that's so important to develop a friendship. And like you said, we've known each other for like almost 20 years now. Who would have ever thought?
Yes. And we're still
And
together.
we're still together. Yeah, so no, it's great. And thank you, Craig, for allowing me to be your first guest in season two. I really appreciate that.
You're ever so welcome. You're ever so welcome. And let's just go ahead and jump right into this. I kind of pull the curtains back a little bit. Belinda and I first started talking about coming on and having the conversation on a podcast. What, Belinda, about 2 weeks ago, maybe a
Yep.
little over a week, about a week or 2 weeks ago. And the country was in such a different time. What's going on in Memphis hadn't happened. And so our conversation was basically centered around having a discussion about differences. And I got off a call. We have this book club that my amazing colleague and the grandmother of my goddaughter, Avery, Kathy Foster, hosts these book discussions for our team every month. And she does such a good job of choosing books. And they're always centered around diversity, because I think probably the world and most companies and I think just people in general are really having deep and insightful conversations centered around diversity. And Kathy chose this book, which is really good, The Vanishing Half. It's a really good book. And I am the worst because I love to be a part of the discussions, but
You don't want
sometimes
to
I can't
read.
read the chapters. But the interesting part about these discussions, the book is just a catalyst to a deeper conversation that it lends itself to, which is why I always love to get on the discussion. My hat's off to her for having the courage to do this, and she does it faithfully. But the last discussion we did, a topic came up about passing. The book is about two sisters and one passes, and so one of my colleagues asked the question, and that's another thing. I love when people ask those type of questions, because I think the only way you learn is if you ask. But we're in such times now where people are so afraid to ask anything for fear that they're going to be labeled as a racist, and that's just not the circle of people that I have around me, nor do I
Right.
like to be around me, because I think if you never ask the question, you'll never learn. So you'll always be walking around in ignorance and possibly doing the wrong things and not knowing that you're doing the wrong thing. So we were talking about passing, and I share with them something. You and I get into that a little later, Belinda, about the whole conversation surrounding passing. She wanted to know, hey, is that something that's really big in the Black community? And we had the conversation on that. And I went farther to talk about. We started talking about racial topics around race. And I shared with her, I said, a dear friend, and I didn't say it was you, Belinda, and now they would know it's you. I said, a good friend of mine's was interested in wearing a natural hairstyle. She was interested in wearing a locks. And I said, she called me after she had talked with some other people, and she said, hey, do you think I should do this? Do you think it would stifle my growth in the company? It'll be frowned on. But, we had this serious conversation. And then it suddenly dawned on me, I don't think people realize that, that within our community, that is something that we have to really think about. Something as simple as, hey, can I wear this hairstyle because it may be offensive to someone, or it may cause me to lose an employment opportunity? And it also brought it back to a conversation that I'd had once with another friend who has locks. And he asked me, hey, do you think, I haven't gotten some of the jobs that I've applied for, do you think that my locks are causing me not to be hired? And
Right.
Belinda, I got to tell you, I thought long and hard, because I didn't want to say the wrong thing, because I know we're in a different space as a country, but and companies are changing the way they view diversity, but the companies are not always making the decisions. Individuals making those decisions, and you never know what's in their heart, and you never know their comfort level. So I was kind of torn about how do I answer that question. And I kind of skated back and forth because I didn't want to answer it in a certain way and then put him in and give him wrong advice and put him in a worse position. So I would just kind of open it up and you and I kind of have a conversation about what we talked about when you started on your journeys or your journey of wearing a natural hairstyle or wearing locks.
Yeah, so Craig, you said a lot already, and a couple things I want to talk about or mention before we get into that conversation is that this is Black History Month, but I want to make it very clear that our history cannot be confined to a month. Our history is every day, 365 days of the year. And even though we do celebrate Black History Month, I think it's important to know that our history expands and go beyond 1 month. Even today, there's some Black person, young, old, making history for our culture, and we just appreciate that. So I just want to make mention of that, first of all. Secondly, yes, the locks, that was a big conversation. That was a very big decision for me. Um, Wearing your hair naturally as African American women means usually not putting chemicals of any type into your hair. Um, but still, it's a process of maintaining it and straightening it. And there's probably a lot of African American women who have natural hair, but still straighten it using heat or some kind of process. I wanted to totally get away from that. During the pandemic, it was just crazy not being able to maintain my hair. Um, and I just wanted to do something different, but I had a hard time making that decision. And now that I think about it, it was really kind of sad, if you will. I called you. I talked to other colleagues. I even talked to some of my white colleagues and got their opinion on it. And everybody was like, yeah, go ahead and do it. Go ahead and do it. But this little voice in the back of my head was saying,
Yes.
you work for a somewhat conservative company, and everybody that, in the profession that we're in, we work with a lot of different clients who may not see my locks as very attractive or very professional.
Right.
And that concerned me. And it's really sad that I had to think about that because as an African American woman, this is just one of the styles that we wear here in. You see some African American wear the knots on their hair, which are very attractive to me. I love it all. But again, being that we're working in corporate America, you have to be mindful, or I thought I had to be mindful of that. And like you said, I talked to several people before I decided to take the plunge. And I just said, oh, well, if it's such a problem, I just have to shave my hair off and start again.
well, well, it's something, but to your point, it's so interesting because I think about when I was having a conversation with you about the young man who asked me that, and I thought twice, and I can remember younger when individuals were asking me about that, and I was a kind of in a space of saying, I don't know if you should do that, just because I don't think you're going to get as many opportunities as you would like to get. Because I don't know if people will be that comfortable or if they're ready for that. Right. And I think that is a nervousness that we have around a lot of things. But why do you think it's so interesting bringing this conversation? Why do you think race is so hard to talk about conversations like this when it involves race? Because I know it wasn't until recently that I think more companies and the country as a whole were willing and openly ready to have these discussions on a corporate level, not just, we have them in our homes all the time and separate, but on a corporate level. Why do you think race is such a hard topic to talk about in Europe?
Because it opens up doors that may lead to something that people don't want to walk into. Change, for example. Some people are just not comfortable with change. And when you start to have these conversations, it brings up, personal feelings and feelings of uneasiness. It makes people reflect on themselves. Um, for example, I work in corporate America. I come home to a predominantly white neighborhood, so I have to kind of think about these things. And I'm not afraid to say, Craig, that I have walked in a supermarket, our local supermarket, and not see anyone who looks like me. And I have to be comfortable with that. And so I think that our colleagues from other races, it makes them reflect on who they are. And all the time, unfortunately, and I hate to say this, but it's not pretty. Sometimes it's, even when we reflect on ourselves, sometimes our thoughts are like, oh, that's not a pretty thought, Belinda.
Right.
When we see things, how we respond to things, but it opens up doors, and it makes us look at ourselves as human beings, as people, and how we view things. And let me be very clear, it's nothing wrong about having your opinions. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's dangerous to have a closed mind.
Right.
And as far as business is concerned, when you have different people, women, Hispanic, African American people around the table making decisions, I think you make better decisions. I think you make decisions that look at all points of view so that you can make a better business decision. And it's so important to have that diversity element into corporate America. And I think a lot of companies are seeing that now. Look at Target.
Right.
Who launched over the years, who have launched African American Black History Month. They support Black businesses by putting their products in their store. Mm-hmm. And I think Tabitha Brown is a great example of that, and then you can look at companies. And I noticed this year that another department store, Kohl's, did the same thing. And they realized, they realize the importance of identifying with people who buy from you, the importance of diversity and putting products out there that people from different cultures would love. It boosts their bottom line. It generated more revenue, because you hear it all the time on TikTok, right? People going in there. I saw TikTok the other day. It made me laugh because this woman came on there and said, Target ought to be shaming themselves, putting all this Tabitha Brown in their store and then running out. And I'm here at Target trying to buy it, But, it was funny and comical, but it's true. Her things were selling out, in Target. And I'm guilty. I brought like $100 worth of stuff.
Do you find yourself, let me ask you this, bring it back around, because this is always, the thing I love about having these conversations, and as we do different episodes, I love to have the conversation with like a diverse group of people, because I'm always interested to know everybody's experience. And I know we do this a lot at work. I always think at work I have the best conversations, and I always think with my friends I have the best conversation, because when I tell you diverse, I've always wanted to be surrounded by people who look different, thought differently, act differently than I do, because I learn a lot more. But do you find yourself having to, which is something I talked about with some friends, be very always conscious and aware of how I'm represented whether it's at work or whether it's off work? There's a life. I always say there's my life on my job, and then there's my life at home. Like I realized, and I've realized, and you and I've talked about this. I realized early on that I'm always aware of my appearance, how I look. Whether I have a frown on my face, whether I have a stoic face, and I'm very conscious when I'm in a certain area, that I'm smiling, that I'm looking pleasant, because I never want to appear to be intimidating. And I was talking to some friends. I say, I don't know if that's something that you have to ever think about, but that's always in my mind when I'm not at home, I'm not around my family, that I keep a pleasant look on my face. Because I always say I have my work life, and then I have my who I am and how people view me outside of work. Is that something that's always in the back of your head?
Yeah, I think it is because you put on this pleasant face at work, and as soon as you start frowning, they're like, "What's wrong? Why is Belinda not smiling? What's
Right.
going on?" You know, and it's like, well, I'm human. Maybe I'm just not having a great day, long as I'm not taking it out on you. But yeah, but I think this comes a point of authenticity where you just need to be yourself no matter where you're around. And I think that's why you surround yourself with a select group of people, right? Because you can be yourself no matter who you're with. And I think that is so important.
Right.
Um, and I think as we've gotten older, Craig, we probably have less and less friends. Our circle is smaller because you know who you can be yourself around and people you can't be. And you
Absolutely.
get tired of faking it, right? I
Absolutely.
mean, you
Right.
just get tired of faking it. Okay, this is who I am. This is what you're going to get. If you don't
Right.
like it, okay,
And
move
and
on.
and the whole, and another thing that might be shocking, I don't know, it may not be. I'm just assuming that, but as I have these conversations, I'm always interested to learn what people perceptions are, and not just black and white, of different race or different cultures, what their perceptions are, because you and I are prime
Perceptions of
example.
you,
Huh? Not of
perceptions of,
me. Not of
oh,
me, just of different cultures and different
okay,
environments or different situations. Because a lot of time most people peer from the outside and look in, they have these stereotypes based on what they see on the news or what they've heard versus their experience. Again, I always love to use example. You and I, we are so far apart on so many things that people might be surprised, because people tend to think that whether it's black race, whether it's white race, that everyone's a monolith. They think just like this is the way they view this opinion. And you and I, our best and most controversial conversations are the
totally
ones
opposite. We
that
totally,
we're on opposite ends of
yes,
the
we
spectrum.
are.
We are on opposite end. But again, I think that's the beauty of, number one, of conversations. And I think that's the beauty of really trying to find someone, not always trying to gravitate to people who look like you or who think like you or who
Absolutely.
you think like you. And I think for me, that is what caused the most division in our society, is that we don't really take time to get to know each other,
I agree.
versus getting to know each other, or trying to break down the walls and sit beside or talk to someone who just might have a different view than you, because you're so afraid that we're so much not alike that it's going to turn very contentious, when it's just the total opposite. You walk away thinking like, oh, I probably don't agree with you still, but I've learned something,
Right, exactly.
and,
Well,
and that's one of the biggest problems, I
but
think.
no, and it goes back to your first question. Why do people have a tough time having these conversations? Because it makes them look at themselves,
Mhm.
You have to have an open mind. You have to want to have a diverse group of friends. You have to want to learn about different cultures. And, like you said, we don't have to agree, but respect is so important. Every black male with dreadlocks is not a thug.
Right, right,
I'm just, and let me just very, very brutally honest here. Everyone who is of Asian descent is not necessarily good at math or IT, but
right.
those are the stereotypes out there, you
Nor
know?
everyone who has a certain political affiliation is a racist. You
Right,
know,
right.
because
Or
a person doesn't agree with me.
every tall guy, every tall guy don't play basketball.
That's right. Absolutely.
you know
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely.
but you have to be open, and you have to have that open mind and have those tough conversations. I remember asking someone a question, and she was of Indian descent, and I was asking her about a language
Mhm.
that, or something that they do, older people especially. And I said to her, I'm not trying to be ignorant or rude, but help me understand. And that's the way I approach the subject, because I noticed that elderly Indian people shake their head when they talk.
Mhm.
And I asked, why do they do that? And I learned that was a form of communication, that was their language.
Right.
And I was very surprised to learn that. But I didn't mock her, but it was just really important for me to learn that. And
Right.
you have to have those the ability to ask those questions to find out. And like you said, it's okay to ask.
It
I'd rather
is.
for you to ask me than you to say something that is inappropriate or not understand and formulate an ideal in your mind already about a certain group of people or a culture or something we do. I'd rather for you to come to me and ask so we can, I can answer your
Than,
question.
than assume, because I
Yeah.
think now more than ever, not to really get in the weeds on what's happening now, because what I wanted to do on these podcasts is to really create a safe space to have good, productive conversations versus conversations coming from an angry or mean place. I think right now the country is, when we look at what's going on with rest in peace, Tyree Nichols, what's going on with him, and the fact that there were African American cops involved in that. I'm sure in a lot of people's minds, especially African American and non-African American, it raises the question, what, how could this happen by someone who looks like him? But and this is me. I'm gonna go here. Belinda.
Okay, go there.
It goes back to this whole conversation. I remember one of the things that we talked on our book discussion, which is the book The Vanishing Half talks about, is this whole issue of passing, which during that time was about being afforded a better life, with being able to look closer to white, to be able to not to be viewed as an African American, because being white or Caucasian afforded you a much better life. And some families had no other choice. That was their only way out, in hopes that this person would get out and be able to come back and help us, but at least this person escaped. But it feeds to the bigger conversation I think you and I had, because the person say, "Hey, does that really exist?" I was like, "Of course it does." But even to this day, you know what? I always tell the story between my brother and myself. He was of a lighter hue, lighter complexion, and I was dark. And I always felt like people considered him as better looking, which, by the way, brother, you're not better looking than I am. Just for the record now. I don't feel like that now. But I remember growing up, I always felt people made a distinction between the two of us. And it always, in my opinion, was like he was a little better than I was, because he was of lighter complexion. And we in our community kind of celebrated that. I grew up in a small town in Mississippi, but we kind of celebrated. That was always viewed as positive. We would use the term good hair, because the hair was that was closer to a Caucasian hair. It was straighter. It wasn't of a coarser texture. If you had a coarser grade of hair, it was considered bad hair. You had bad hair. They said something else, but pretty much you had bad hair. Or we would say, "Oh, she's so beautiful to be so dark," or "She's a beautiful black girl." like the two didn't go together. And so it wasn't until I started getting older, because that I began to appreciate my color and who I was, because what it tells you is that there's something wrong with you with being dark skinned, and it feeds into that whole insecurity and the whole self-loathing that sometimes you have, because you don't like who you are as a person. And as a matter of fact, we talked about there was a whole skincare line out there to bleach your skin, to make you lighter.
And it still exists. It still exists.
I don't know if it still exists or not, but I know, there was Ambi out there that people use faithfully to lighten their skin, which again all feeds into, when you talk about where we are, you never know where a person is mentally, which feeds into this whole societal, I think, message to I said me, because I've only been black as an African American, that the way you look is not good enough. There's something not perfect. There's something that's not good about your complexion and your existence as a black person, as a person of color, and you internalize that. internalize that. And I think it manifests itself in a ton of ways as you get up, as you grow older, if you don't deal with those issues, if you don't address them.
Right. And you know, a perfect example of that is Spike Lee did a movie on School Days.
Right.
And he dealt with that issue in that
That's
movie.
right. That's right.
You know, he had the sorority with the light-skinned women with the long hair. I think it was a sorority. And then he had the what did he call them?
I know.
What was the wannabes?
Wannabes, absolutely.
And then he had the dark-skinned women with the more coarse hair, and they were fighting each other. You know,
exactly.
he dealt with that subject, and that is so true. I remember growing up and hearing about the paper bag test.
Right.
Where if you were darker, you know, they would hold a paper bag up to your skin. And if you were darker than that paper bag, you were not passing. So there are a lot of examples like that. And that's really sad because you're right. I think some of the most beautiful people in this world have dark complexions. And you know, the joke, and you know, we joke about this in our among ourselves as African Americans, but when President Obama was elected, you know, the thing was like light-skinned men are back in style now, remember? You know, but it's really sad. But the most beautiful thing about our race, which I love, is that we come in all shapes, sizes, colors, long hair, short hair, different color hair. And that is something about our culture to be celebrated, because we are not just light skin or dark skin, you know?
Right, exactly.
I saw a little girl this past Saturday who had the most beautiful red hair. And Craig, and she was a beautiful black little girl, and she had beautiful red hair. And I just thought, how gorgeous is that?
Exactly.
I mean,
absolutely.
And you're right. We have to learn how to embrace our differences and celebrate the beauty that we're given naturally. Again, going back to my hair, you know, I don't find the need to straighten it anymore. I think there is beauty in my locks. And unfortunately, it took this long for me to get there, but I got there, and that's the important thing.
Well, there's no chance for me, but you know what? But I always say, this is what I always think it does. I think that sometimes, and this is what I call it. This, I'm sure, is not a scientific term, but it's just what I call it. I think sometimes because we have been exposed to so much negative behavior and so much negative feedback, and we see so many negative images when it comes to us as a race, that it does damage to your psyche, and it puts you into a survival mode. I talk about this in corporate America on a job, you know, and I'm sure you've seen this, you know, how whereas you go on a job, if you're in certain positions and you don't see a lot of people that look like you, and either you get in a job or one or two get in a job, you almost go into a survival mode to say that they're only going to hire one or two of us, and I need to be the one who stay on board. So I need to keep everybody away because they're only going to be there. There's only enough room for 3 people to eat or 2 to eat. And I need to be one of those that's eating. And I think somehow that gets into our mind. And maybe it's what do you talk? I think we took this class, unconscious bias. I think those are those unconscious biases that we have, that we don't really realize sometimes that we're doing it. I've seen it, you know, I've seen it. And I think that is a result of everything that you experience in society growing up. You know, they're talking about your appearances. And this is why representation matters. The being in spaces where you don't see a lot of people that look like you. And in your mind, you think that, well, there's not enough room for more of us. So I need to do everything I can do to be the one that's here. You know, or if there are 2 spots, I need to be one of the 2. And I oftentimes call that the survival mode that you don't sometimes realize that you're in, but your action dictates that, hey, keep Belinda away because
it could be selfish mode too.
It's selfish. It's selfish and survival because, again, for so long in the world, I think the world is changing, society is changing,
Yeah.
but for so long in certain jobs, in certain positions, you just didn't see a lot of people that looked like you. And you felt privileged and fortunate if you were selected. And then you start thinking, how can I ensure that I stay here?
Right. Maybe the question should be, how should I ensure that someone will be moving in my position, succession planning, so to speak? How can
Absolutely.
I mentor? How can I lift up other young African Americans or people who look like me up to these positions? How
Mhm.
can I successfully do that? And
Mhm.
you're probably right. It might be survival mode. I don't know. Probably more selfish on my in my perspective, but I agree that we need to kind of say, okay, here I am in this position in this company. What do I need to put in place to make sure I mentor a Craig or mentor whoever to move up to the position once I move on? And I think that's the bigger question. And I think we've gotten away from that. I often tell this story when people talk about historically Black colleges and universities and predominantly white institutions. I went to a PWI, you went to a HBCU. But I remember,
Go Braves, go Braves, go Alcorn Braves, go Braves. Okay, my plug is over. Go
okay, but I remember in the summertime going to Atlanta to visit, spend the whole summer with my aunt and uncle. And I used to go to school at Clark Atlanta University. And I told you the story 1,000 times. It blew my mind. I went to a pretty white institution in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and then I went to Clark Atlanta for summer school just to hang out in Atlanta.
Mhm.
And I decided I was going to be big and bold and just skip class and
Mhm.
hang out with some new friends on
Mhm.
campus. Little did I know, my instructor, my professor, called my uncle and said, Belinda did not show up for class today. Now, when I did that at my institution during the regular school year, they couldn't care less if I went to class.
Right,
But
right.
I think that's what we lost. I think we lost a sense of the village, so to speak. The sense of, putting your arms around somebody and helping them move to the next level,
Right.
no matter what that level is. But especially in corporate America, I just don't think we see it enough. It exists, I'm sure it does in some companies, but we still don't see that enough. And we have to remember to do that. It's not about us as individuals, but it's about the village. It's about everyone who looks like me, in my opinion. Um, how do I help this person in some way to make it to their next level, to make it to their next level, to my next level? And that's what you don't see enough of. And that's really sad. And we have to find something to do to correct that, or else we're going to lose a whole generation of young professionals or,
And
um,
about Blunda, sorry to interrupt, but
no,
and about the village being inclusive, because I think the beauty of the village is that the village should look like the world. And I think that's where we when you're talking about, when I talk about tough conversations about differences, that's where we struggle at. Because I always say this, and I hope I don't get any bad letters or bad emails or bad comments about it. I always say the most segregated, the separated day of the week is what I always say. It's on Sunday,
Sunday.
because we all go to our own churches, and the one thing that should unite us, which is religion and spirituality and however you want to focus, the one thing that should bind us is the thing that I feel that separate us the most. It's on Sunday morning, but and so in my mind, I'm always thinking, I'm always thinking is that, you know what,
But you know
I
what,
think I
Craig?
think we have. Let me just say this, and I think, and you can jump on it. I think we have so much difference. I think we have so much indifference, or there is so much separation or division in this country and in this world, because I think we really don't take the time to know each other. It's hard to hate somebody that that you have a relation. It's hard for me to, when I say you and I always feud and get into these horrible fights, well, they don't last long, or we come back together. because we have mutual respect and because we know each
Right.
other, we have built a relationship. I think that that's something we still do very little of. The younger generation do a much better job when you're talking about our generation. But I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
I give them that credit. Yeah. But no, I was going to say something because um, we talk about segregation churches, we could, I'm sorry, but I love my Christian brothers and sisters of different races and creeds and color. But there is nothing like the experience of going to a Black church. There is not, to me, there is nothing like the experience of going
That's
to.
another conversation. That is
Well,
a
wait a minute, but let me finish
that
that.
is another
I
conversation.
just, but Craig, I just love my culture so much. I love being around my folks. I'm sorry, I'm not closed minded. I can go hang out with other people, other races, other cultures, but I love hanging out in churches,
I,
clubs. I love hanging out with Black
I'm
folks.
not
I
gonna
just
go
do.
there. I'm not going there with you. Let me tell you what I love. I realize this about me is that I love being around people. I love understanding and seeing what makes me so much different than you, especially when we get to talk. There's sometimes that I walk away from our conversation, I'm blown away. And I think that that's my healthy love of people and exploring what makes individuals tick. Sometimes I push a button intentionally. Like
Yes, you do.
I know there are some colors that I can put on this screen right now that
But
would just
Craig,
send
wait.
you into orbit.
Right,
Yeah.
but Craig, but before we go, before you take me over, you got me started now because I'm
Go
gonna say
ahead.
something
Go ahead.
else about that.
Go ahead. You got the floor.
I think my parents and your parents and they had a tough job with us.
Mhm.
And one of the things I know personally, my mom tried to do is expose me to nice restaurants so I know how to eat with the right fork and knife. She
Mhm.
took me to plays where no one else no one else was there that looked like me and my sister and my parents. She took me to professional sporting games, not because we were rich, because she wanted to expose me to different things, right?
Mhm.
And then when my nephew was born, my sister did the same thing.
Mhm.
But one of the things, he went to a predominantly white high school. He went to a math magnet school, and that magnet schools focus on math and science.
Right.
And so all of my sister noticed that all of his classmates were predominantly white.
Mhm.
So what she thought was important is to expose him to our culture more. So
Mhm.
there came in the Black church, the Jack and Jill organization,
Mhm.
the Black History, whatever organization. There was a organization that was affiliated with a church teaching about African American history, because it is so important that we teach our kids our culture. And
Right.
that's for every race, that's for every group, because we have to love who we are before we can open our minds and our hearts to other people. If I hate who I am, how can I expect to show support and love and openness to another culture?
Right.
And so we have to learn how to do that with our kids. And I think look what's happening in Florida, where they're
Right.
taking out an advanced course on Black history out of the public school systems. Shame on Florida, shame on the governor. But what we should be doing as a race, as a culture, is having our own Black history classes in church after school,
Mhm.
if necessary, to teach our kids about our culture. We cannot afford to lose that. And we got to take a stronger stance on it, and we got to do something about it. If the governor of Florida don't want us to teach it in public schools, well, guess what? We got enough PhDs in our culture. We got enough professors, teachers in our cultures. Why can't one of the churches open up? Why can't a public center open up and teach these kids our school, our culture outside of school? So sometimes we do lean on the government too much, and people make decisions, but we can't allow that to happen. what I don't want to see happen is we lose the sense of our culture, who we are, and our history. And I do agree with you on one thing. I think the culture now, the young kids now, they're doing a very good job of that, of not losing who they are. So even though I don't necessarily agree on how they do it, I am proud to say they are holding
Well,
on to
there's
their
no
culture.
different. There's no different than our parents didn't agree with the way that we. I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
because that's I mean, I think that every generation, the generation before them or two generations, didn't agree with something that they
That's
did,
true.
like whether it's the mini skirts or whatever. So so that I think that's just a sign of the time.
So
What mostly concerns me and is number one, I do think that there has to be, especially with a lot of images that we're now seeing, we have to find a way to teach from a standpoint of little girls and boys of colors to love themselves, because
absolutely.
those images that you are seeing on the news and what's going on in Memphis, that can chip away at you. That can chip away at the way you feel about yourself.
But
I know a few nights ago I had to mute the television when it came on because I saw it one time. I
watch
couldn't
it
stand to
again.
see it anymore. So I think that, I mean, you do have to find a way to, as I said during the time period when you were saying we was into the whole passing the color deal. You have to find a way to teach the young kids, young men and women of color at an early age, their self-worth, to love yourself, that you're valued. And even if you don't see one person, if you walk into an office, if you walk into a building, you walk into a room, and even if you don't see one person that look like you, you're enough.
Yeah.
You're enough.
No, I totally agree with you on that. And the way we do that is teach them that when we were in Africa, most of us have African descendants, that we were kings and queens and prince and princesses over there. We got, we were sold into slavery. Most of our ancestors were sold into slavery, but we need to teach them they still wear that crown.
Yeah.
And if you could get that message to kids, these young people early on, then I think you would see some behavior changes. And I'm not an expert on Black history. I'm not an expert on psychology or sociology, but I just cannot help but think that if we teach our kids the most vibrant, most brilliant, most in-depth history that the Africans and African Americans have contributed to this country, and not only to this country, but to this world.
Right.
I mean, that is so powerful in itself. And you're right. They would think differently about themselves. And Craig, that when you think differently about yourself, you act differently. You behave differently.
Of course, you move through the world in a different way. And I think that should also translate into, it goes back to what we started talking about when we first came out. How do we bridge the gap? How do we be, or how do I be a bridge to the gap that now exists? Because I think that's a bigger problem. That's a problem for me. That's a problem for me. I personally am always thinking about, how do we bring people together? Because we can't continue to live in our separate silos, because I think that's a source of no communication. That's a source of what we're seeing that's going on in the world, because we're too comfortable, I think, living in our own silos. And we all have to do a better job of trying to understand each other. And I think that will make for a better world for our kids, for the generations to come.
No, I agree with you on that. It would make for a better world. I just want to also say that, and this is where we would start to disagree a little bit, is that it's okay to celebrate your individual cultures.
Oh, absolutely.
Because I don't want us to get away from doing that, and young people from doing that. So it is okay. So even though I have gone to non-denominational churches, there's something about a Black church that just fuels my soul.
I'm not. That's another conversation. That's another conversation. You don't want my unspoken matters on that. That's another conversation for another episode. and probably someone else should host that episode because I don't want to get myself in trouble. I don't want to get myself in trouble. My first show of season 2.
No, but, you won't get in trouble because I do think, I've gone to non-denominational churches and it was the most beautiful experience. Hey, I went to a Catholic university and I've gone to Catholic mass, not being Catholic. And I thought it was one of the most beautiful, calming, peaceful experiences that I have ever experienced. So I get it. There's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong
absolutely.
with it.
Again, it comes to the mind. You have to have that open mind. You have to have a willingness to learn and experience different things.
And I'm of the belief I celebrate however people choose to worship, or if they choose not to worship. I mean, I think that's the beauty of the world. It's like you have a choice of what you want to believe, how you choose to worship. I celebrate and respect everyone as long as it's not detrimental to anyone's life of happiness.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Totally agree.
But we have been talking almost an hour, and I can talk 2 hours, but I won't. But I want to say, hey, first of all, everybody who tuned in, thank you. We will have many more really good conversations coming your way. Thanks for tuning in. And Ms. Pridgeon, thank you for agreeing to come on. See, we didn't even fight like we normally
I was trying to pick a fight with you. You didn't.
I know you were. I was not going to go there. My goal.
I was trying to push a button a little bit, but you held back.
I know it. My goal is to stay out of trouble, is to create a space so that others who want to come on and share and talk, I'll go back and forth with you. But I know when I need to be quiet. So, yeah, anyway, so
yeah, Craig, congratulations on your second season.
Thank you.
I listened to all of your podcasts the first season, and they were really insightful. So even though we talked a little bit about race in honor of Black History Month, we're not experts at everything, but I just want to say I applaud you for having these tough conversations and putting them out there, and hopefully it will continue to grow, and you will just have a really great audience and good turnout, and people listen to your podcast. So,
hey, well, you'll be back. I can tell already you chomping at the bits to bait me to get me on some of these topics that
Yeah, he was being nice today because
I am a lot more freeing off the camera, but I want to make sure I have a job next week. So I have to exhibit restraint.
Are you trying to say I won't have a job next week?
I didn't say that. I'm just talking about me. I want to make sure I have a job next week. Hey, but anyway, that is too funny. But anyway, hey, Pridgeon, thank you. Any and everybody who's listened, please share this episode. Please subscribe and like the video if you enjoyed our conversation. Comments if you want to leave some comments. Send me a message if you want to jump on one of these episodes with me. But most importantly, as I stated in the beginning, I created this space as a safe place for us to come and have productive, kind, respectful conversations. And even if we walk away with disagreeing, we respectfully agree to disagree, but at least we've opened the conversation up and we've opened ourselves up for room to grow. But remember to always speak up about those unspoken matters, and we'll see you on next week.
See you later, Craig.
See you later, Pridgeon.